Let's start at the very beginning. Of course, I can only go back as far as my memories reach, so I can't tell you what it's like coming out of the womb, but what I can tell you is how great of an early childhood I had. I don't mean that in a sense of bragging or boasting, because I'm extremely grateful for my early years. Not only did I never have to worry about bare essentials or be worried about my safety, but I had two great parents and a sister. Which, of course, at the time having a sister wasn't that big of a blessing, but I also had a nice comfortable house with my own room and almost every and any video game console you could ever think of. I could go on and on with the things I had. I was and still am extremely lucky for that early stage in my life. My most prominent memories of when I was young was the Christmas season. It felt like magic. No school, presents, and good food. I mean, who could complain? I knew that Christmas revolved around religion and Jesus' birthday, but that had absolutely no effect on why I was personally celebrating. My family went to church, and not just Christmas and Easter only, but at the same time we weren't completely dedicated to attending every single weekend. That being said, I could recognize the significance, but I couldn't experience that significance. Outside of Christmas and church when I was younger, I was a great student. With that came a lot of praise, and with that praise came a lot of pride. I built high expectations for myself in school, even back in like first and second grade, since I knew people would notice my efforts and in return, praise me for that. The praise I received is how I valued my worth. Now, of course, I'm not saying doing good in school is bad, but it isn't where your identity should lie. I think a lot of my high set expectations are rooted in this early stage of my life where praise for good grades would affect how I viewed myself. In my personal life at this time, I was making friends, having fun, and playing outside. When it came to family, like I said, it was almost picture perfect. The only thing different in my childhood compared to others was I had a mom who had frequent seizures. I'm sure when I say that word, a lot of people would react in a scared way. That being said, to me, it was completely normal. My mom would frequently fall to the floor in private and also in public, and everyone would be extremely concerned. However, it didn't faze me. It was normal. I learned slowly growing up that was caused by a brain tumor. Again, I was young and didn't even know what that meant. Moving forward into my late childhood and what most people would describe as their tweens and early teens, I continued to be that great student, continued to have a perfect family life, and was still very lukewarm in my commitment to God and Jesus. I mean, to be completely honest, I was like 12 and 11. Not many kids are completely devoted to God and Jesus. But getting to an older age, it was harder for my parents to tell me to play less video games. And in return, I started playing upwards of 6 to even 12 hours a day. Now, of course, I'm not saying that's abnormal, as many grade schoolers and early middle schoolers play a lot too, but the amount that I was playing was definitely not healthy at all. My life at this stage in correlation to faith was very rocky. I would attend a Wednesday night youth night, but only for the reason that if I went there, I could skip church on the weekends. There were times I would think more deeply about my faith, and honestly, I could tell I was distant from God. I tried with very little effort to fix that problem, but overall gave up and said where I was at in my faith was fine. Now, as I kept getting a little older, I definitely started having a growing interest in girls. Look, alright, they're cute, fun to talk to, and I wanted one to be my girlfriend, even at a young age. With that, of course, I knew that sex before marriage was a sin, and I vowed I never ever would do that. And well, I never did. But that doesn't mean I didn't make some other poor decisions. Remember when I said I would go to Wednesday night youth group just to skip on weekends? Well, that was the partial truth. Another part of that equation was there was a girl there that, let's just say, I was developing a little more than a crush on her. It honestly was close to an obsession. I mean, look, she was a little quiet, pretty similar to me. She went to the same youth group and school as me, and of course she was pretty, obviously. That being said, you're probably like, well, did you ask her out, and how did that go? Well, no, I didn't. Partially because I was young at the time and didn't feel like having our parents drive us to a date, and also because I was a little, what's the word? Terrified of speaking to her. Needless to say, I never made a move or even really talked to her one-on-one, but that wasn't the last of her. Outside of this major crush I had, I also had some influences that weren't particularly good. At this late elementary school, early middle school age, some guys my age were handling this new desire for girls in other ways. They would talk about these Instagram pages, YouTube videos, and straight up full-fledged pornography that they were watching. Look, I knew that porn was bad, and I also knew that it was a sin, so I didn't dare touch it. However, no one told me that looking at Instagram pages that were highly sexualized was a sin or bad. So of course, I listened to the guys my age and went and looked at them. And look, I'll be honest as well, I liked what I saw. These images were fun to look at, but I had no idea of the destruction that they could have on me and my future. Slowly, as I became bored with the softcore pornography I was viewing, and as I got older and more guys my age started watching porn, I started to entertain the idea of watching porn a little more. I became more warm to the idea because I started realizing what I was doing on Instagram was actually already a sin, and watching porn is also a sin, so I was doing equally wrong. Then one day, I decided to go on the hub for the first time, and honestly, I got scared and was frankly disgusted with what I was looking at. I wasn't on there for long and vowed to never touch it again. Until about 2 days later, when I got curious again. My rationale for going back to it was, and I swear I'm not joking when I say this, but I really just wanted to know what boobs looked like. I didn't want to see them to arouse myself. I was frankly just curious. Sadly, that curiosity led me into a deep, dark pit of addiction, sexual impurity, and isolation. It is safe to say that I was never further from God at this point in my life, and I finally, for the first time, willingly and knowingly backstabbed my faith in Jesus for the first time. Now, that on its own is bad, but my circumstances were not just getting worse in my decision-making and sexual impurity. Earlier, I spoke about my family and how picture perfect it was. Sadly, that perfect picture was soon going to be ruined. My mom's brain tumor was slowly starting to grow back and impact her far worse than it ever had before. She slowly but surely was starting to have more health problems and having a harder and harder time thinking and processing things. For some reason at the time, I already felt like I knew what was going to happen. She was getting weaker and weaker, and although I didn't correlate that with her brain tumor, I for some reason had some sixth sense instinct that was screaming she's going to die. It all didn't officially click until one day my parents told us there was a chance she wasn't going to make it. Again, I felt that coming already, so although it should have been a shock, it really didn't feel like it. Moving throughout the next few months, of course, things just got worse and worse. I went from being able to see my mom hang out with us as a family and enjoy life as a whole, to seeing her slowly lose her ability to move, and then slowly lose her ability to talk, and then slowly lose her ability to even eat. She officially passed away on my second day of 8th grade. Moving throughout the next few weeks, family came into town, we planned the funeral, and I wasn't in school. Kinda just weird because I really wasn't doing anything, but at the same time, probably the greatest impact on my life just happened, and being a 13-year-old, it was hard to process that. The funeral was alright, I mean, considering the circumstance why people were there, it wasn't great, but at the same time, seeing everyone coming and supporting our family was really cool. Looking back, I realized that I wanted to cry so bad, but I was in such shock that I could hardly even fake it. But hey, life goes on, and although I wish I could curl up in a ball and not have to do anything ever, that isn't realistic. Going back to school, my closest friends already knew what was happening in my life, but no one else did. When you disappear for a week or two, especially in middle school, a lot of kids get curious and ask where I went. Not only them, but of course my teachers too. Having to tell people my mom died caused everyone to react in a way of not knowing what to say. It made me feel awkward, and even to a point to this day, I still don't often tell people what happened to her, as it makes them feel awkward and ruins a lot of conversations for me and that other person I'm talking to. Moving forward throughout the rest of my middle school and early high school, I was still trying to figure out life, my faith, and my future. Again, at this point, I was heavily addicted to pornography. I told myself I could stop any day I wanted to, but didn't want to give it up as it gave me something to look forward to. I questioned my faith in God for sure, but still believed in him. I honestly thought my faith was in him as well, and to an extent it was, but when I was continuously unashamedly going back and watching porn, how much faith did I truly have? Probably not much. Through my circumstances and not so bright of a future outlook, I started questioning my will to live as a whole. My original rationale was if people suffer more than they extract joy out of life, then why does anyone care to live at all? Why not just have everyone end their life, as there is less suffering and death than life? Despite these thoughts, I never acted on them and continued on. Having these thoughts were probably a little strange for a 14-year-old, but that doesn't mean my life was completely abnormal. I still had class, still had responsibilities, and still had crushes on girls. Remember that girl from earlier? Well, she was in one of my classes in 9th grade. And to say I was pumped was definitely a major understatement. I got to sit right next to her and finally started to talk to her after all these years. That crush on her never dwindled from 6th grade, to say the least. Now, of course, you're wondering, where did things go? Did you ask her out? Well, of course not. I was still too scared, but once again, that wasn't the last of her. The rest of high school leading up to my senior year wasn't anything too crazy. I for sure definitely was going through a bit of an identity crisis, looking for validation in watching porn, but also looking for validation in others. I thought my only way to be worth something was to be successful. I started my first ever YouTube channel uploading video game content videos. It started off slow, but ended up turning into a pretty decent job throughout high school, and I ended up gaining quite a few subscribers. I worked so many hours a week for a high schooler, but to me it was worth all the success I had reached. Again, the success was great, but it was also how I valued my worth, which was extremely unhealthy. At the end of my junior year is when things got bad for me. I was 17 and starting to feel like living wasn't for me. I felt isolated as my dad started to date again and my sister was off at college. I had friends, but not ones that I had complete trust in. The only enjoyment that I could suck out of life was from pornography. Having success on YouTube didn't feel the same, and I realized how much it truly didn't matter. That being said, with everything falling apart, I was hopeless. I considered trying to mend my faith with Jesus, but even then that felt impossible. I started waking up in the morning feeling physically sick. I knew it wasn't a virus or anything along those lines, and it was just from me being blatantly depressed. I honestly don't remember if I made any attempts to end my life around this time, but truly I don't really want to know if I did or how close I got. I obviously made it through that rough patch, but all I went from was being extremely depressed to just being normally depressed again. Moving into my senior year, I committed to the idea of skipping college and looking to focus on my YouTube channel as a full-time job. No one around me considered that to be a good idea, and I could see their point of view but considered it to be a bad opinion. Outside of career and school, I finally started to entertain the idea of saying screw it and finally asking the girl out that I'd been crushing on for the past 6 years. I didn't really have any good openings, so I figured I would take it a day at a time, and whenever I had a good opportunity, I would just go for it. However, later that fall, my dad proposed again, meaning that I was going to have a new stepmom, but also an entire new family. To say I was thrilled about it would be pretty far from the truth, but that's life, and as long as it made my dad happier, I couldn't really complain. The whole situation definitely built a lot of isolation in me, as my dad had been my #1 priority and friend for the past however many years, probably since I was born. There was no one else in my life that I would consider an amazing friend or someone that I had a lot of trust with, so losing that tight bond was pretty depressing for me. I figured I saw how much having a romantic relationship changed my dad's happiness, which made me feel even more inclined to find and pursue someone myself. That being said, one of the only things I really knew about the girl I was crushing on is that she at least goes to church a little bit, meaning that I definitely had to clean myself up. Porn was not only destroying my life, but I knew that it could also destroy my future relationships, so I wanted to quit cold turkey. That's when I officially realized how much of a hold it had on me. I couldn't quit. I kept going back and getting stuck in loops of watching endless amounts, and I seriously thought I had no escape. Ignoring the fact I hadn't had a grasp on my addiction yet, I ended up finally asking this girl on a date. When, of course, I had that good opportunity I was talking about earlier. It was rough, talking to her, but she ended up saying yes. At this point, I was having a little bit of success with controlling my lust and was about 1.5 months completely free from porn, which for me felt like an eternity, so I figured I was good. I got to meet her and got to know her a little bit, and felt things between her and I were going pretty good. With that in mind though, I felt a little empty inside. I couldn't place my finger on it, but this wasn't filling the void I wanted it to. Things ended up going south, and she ended things with me pretty quick. I felt so exhausted with trying to make things feel like they were completely okay that I wasn't fazed by it ending. I also had a feeling that things were not completely over yet between us. Once things were over, however, I slipped straight back into watching porn pretty much every day, and once again was the only place I could squeeze joy out of my life. Like I said, I definitely didn't have a grasp on my addiction at all. Also at this time, I started looking towards my future and realized I didn't have too bright of a future making YouTube videos on video games. I realized it was probably for the best to go to college, and then it would also give me a place to live away from my dad and new stepmom. I applied to a few schools and ended up choosing the one that my sister went to, since I had no other preconceived notions about any of the other schools, as I applied to these colleges extremely late and hadn't gone on a single tour anywhere else. At this point as well, I completely surrendered my channel, as I wasn't passionate about it and also because it had no long-term longevity. I was going to college simply because I was told to go, and now I had absolutely nothing. No channel, it felt like I had no one who truly cared for me, an extremely broken relationship with Jesus, a raging porn addiction, and once again my mental health absolutely crashed from 0 to the negatives. I simply felt depressed. Some nights I tried very minimally to take my own life. Nothing worked out obviously, and once again I truly don't want to know how close I did get. But once I got to summer, at least there was some fun to be had, and I had no responsibilities, so I could at least endlessly indulge in video games and laziness. I wanted to start making changes because I knew this lifestyle wouldn't work forever, so I started reading from my Bible and trying to learn more from the church services I was going to with my family. A guy from the college I would be attending in the fall reached out and told me about a campus ministry I could get involved in, and I told him I'd be interested. I was finally taking some steps of faith. I also figured if I was doing all that, I wanted to start my own YouTube channel about talking about Jesus. That is, of course, the channel you're on now. All of that goodness being said, I was still struggling to break free from my porn addiction and still didn't feel completely loved. I did, however, recognize placing my faith in Jesus completely was the only way to fix these problems. problems. After summer, I of course was moving into college. At this time, I was working on building my faith back as hard as I possibly could. Issue being is that I was still very depressed. I had little hope for my future and felt completely lost being at the college I was at. I vowed to myself, however, that I would try anything and everything to rebuild my faith before I made a permanent decision to end my life. I also vowed that since I was in a completely new environment, I wasn't going to watch porn again. I figured if I didn't allow that habit to spread into my new environment, then I could maybe completely kill it as a whole. With that being said, however, I felt depressed, tired, mentally and physically sick, and was struggling to find any reason to make it another day. Although I wasn't watching porn, I still felt miserable. Again, I knew my answer to fixing all my problems was to find Jesus, but that in itself took some work as well. But like I said, I tried everything and anything that would help rebuild my faith. I went to church, I went to student ministries, I went to Bible studies, I went on a fall retreat, and even though at the time I was struggling and even struggling to see the progress I was making, I slowly but surely started to not be miserable. I noticed my urges to watch porn over time slowly lessen, and overall after a while I was able to identify how much more happy I was. But if you thought the story ends there, then you would be wrong. Remember that girl from middle school and high school? Well, she ended up going to the same college I went to. Again, I saw her here and there throughout the next few months, but one day we bumped into each other again and I could tell she was expressing interest in hanging out again. I was pumped. I thought that things had a chance of working out again. We saw each other a few times and I thought things were definitely going a little bit better than before. I asked one of my friends for advice at the student ministry I was going to, and he said to make my intentions clear with her so that there wouldn't be any confusion. Issue being, when I went to do that for one reason or another, she ended things again. I was really beat up about it for about 2 hours. And then similarly to the first time around, I didn't care again. This time though, it was a little different. The first time around, I was almost thankful as it left me feeling mentally drained and it made me worry about being perfect and faking being a better person than I truly was. This time around, however, I didn't really care about her ending things because I felt solidified and chosen by Jesus. See, over the fall months when I was going to church, going to Bible studies and a fall retreat, and being around other followers of Jesus and reading my Bible, and taking intentional time out of my day to pray, it led me to the point where I was starting to grow closer to Jesus than I ever thought was possible. My entire life up to that point, I called myself a Christian, but now I would identify as a follower of Jesus more than anything. Look, to summarize my entire story, I've been through some rough times in my life, but now I'm in a place where I'm free from porn and my depression. Sure, I still have lustful urges and I still have bad days, but it's much easier to combat that negativity with Jesus by my side. My advice to anyone looking to live a better life through Christ is to just show up and just try. Try meeting fellow Christians, go to church, start reading your Bible, because at the source of that, I believe that over time you'll find prosperity just like I did. The reason I wanted to share my testimony is because I feel like a lot of others go something like this. They were in a bad spot and Jesus pulled them out of it, the end. And to be honest, that's very similar to mine, but what I want you to get out of my story is the effort I put in to find Jesus. There are so many distractions in this world that want your attention and want your trust, but you have to put in effort, and dare I say that you have to fight for your faith, because if you don't, it isn't going to float to you. This is all thanks to Jesus and nothing I could do on my own. I hope there was something in my story that you found relatable, and remember, Jesus is waiting for you. Check out another video on my channel if you want to learn about the Bible on your screen right now.